Do you want to have a lasting example? Some thoughts on that today. Hey, welcome. We take another look into the life and message of Elizabeth Elliot. She called us to live to a higher standard each day. As our series continues, we'll hear from family, friends, and others influenced by Elizabeth's life and her message. Hey, thank you for taking time to join us today. Well, it's a short 4-part series, and we'll be concluding it today as we look at a grandmother's influence, ways to be a lasting example, and being available. Our special guest today is Dr. Tom Howard, brother of Elizabeth. Hear about books, media, attention, composure, accents, and more, including laughter. Well, we'll get to that later. First, though, let's get to part 3 of A Grandmother's Influence, Ways to be a Lasting Example. We'll have a promise for any grandchildren who are fatherless right now, a look into Psalm 10, and even a housekeeping tip of the week.
I talked first about our responsibility to pray for our grandchildren, using the examples from Scripture of Timothy's grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice, a godly heritage which certainly had a deep influence on his life. And I think of my own grandparents who prayed for us. Then I talked in my second talk on the kind of example that we're setting before them and some of the specific things that we might be praying for our children. We cannot teach primarily by precept. We teach most powerfully and lastingly by example. I've had a great pile of letters from some of you, including one grandmother's letter, asking me to pass on a housekeeping tip. Okay, I will. She said she had found it very helpful to use a toothbrush in cleaning around the knobs of a stove, and she has an old false teeth brush, which she has found very useful in scrubbing spots when she does hand wash. So there's your housekeeping tip for the week. I want to thank Ruth Green of Colorado for sending me that tip. I had a letter also from a Pennsylvania grandmother, and there are, just many of you that have been writing to me. And I would suggest that you pray according to the promise of Psalm 10, verse 14. Thou seest that mischief and trouble are his companions. Thou takest the matter into thy own hands. The poor victim commits himself to thee. Fatherless, he finds in thee his helper. Now there's a promise for those of you whose grandchildren are fatherless, either through death or through divorce. And my heart does go out to you and to those children. I think it would just break my heart if my grandchildren were fatherless, especially through divorce. But God sees that, and there are many promises through the Scriptures of God's care, his special care of fatherless children and widows. Let me read Psalm 10:14 again. Thou seest that mischief and trouble are his companions. Thou takest the matter into thine own hands. The poor victim commits himself to thee. Fatherless, he finds in thee his helper. He is the helper of the fatherless. And in Hosea 14:3, we read, in thee the fatherless find a father's care. Well, there's a sense in which we are codependent. That's a word that's used in rather specialized ways today. But as grandmothers, we are dependent on our children sometimes. We may even become dependent on our grandchildren. But let's never forget that they are dependent upon us too. My step-grandmother lived with us for about 8 years. She was very much dependent upon us, But one of the things that I never thought about back in those days, when I was reluctant to have to carry her trays up and when I hated to be told that I needed to go in and visit with Nana, when I didn't really want to go and visit with Nana, I wanted to do something more interesting. But since then I've realized that Nana spent a lot of her time sitting there in that room praying for us children, and only God knows the results in our lives because of Nana's prayers, that dear Nana that we paid far too little attention to. We need each other's help. There's an old saying, paddle your own canoe. But there's a sense in which none of us can paddle his own canoe. We can paddle somebody else's, but we cannot paddle our own. We need others. We're sheep in a flock, and we need the help of the rest of the flock. We're members of a body. Every organ of the body is in league with every other, codependent upon every other, joined together. The need of one is met by the cooperation of the other. If you ask me for prayer, I ask you also for prayer. So many of you write and ask me to pray for you, and I do. Please, will you pray for me as well? A grandmother's special calling is to pray and to be a fellow worker in the same battle in which her children or her grandchildren are engaged. And of course, as grandmothers, we know that our children, the parents of our grandchildren, are engaged in much more than a battle with flesh and blood. We're wrestling against principalities and powers, against spiritual wickedness from the very headquarters of evil. Now let me suggest that you write to your grandchildren. Even if they live nearby, write them letters, send them cards. There are a lot of cute cards that you can buy if you can't write. Many of you may not be able to write because your hands shake too much or you feel that you can't express yourself very well. But there are sweet little cards that can be bought, especially in a Christian bookstore, just even if you write them short notes. And anybody can use government postcards. You know, they're cheap. You don't have to pay for the card. You just pay for the stamp that's on it. And if you buy yourself a little pack of about 10 government postcards and write one line, your grandchildren will be thrilled. The small children will be thrilled to get anything in the mail. And when I talked to Val one day not long ago, she said, when we went out to pick up the mail, my little grandson, Jim Elliott Shepherd, came running out, and with a plaintive voice, he looked up at me and said, "Anything for me?" Well, I don't think there's very often anything for Jim unless I've written to him. Maybe his other grandparents write to him, but I write, and if I've seen a fox go across the snow-covered lawn in front of our house, or I've seen our friend the great horned owl out in the tree, or I've seen a mouse in the kitchen, I write him little animal stories like that. Anything funny that happens to Gramps and me on our trips, I write them sometimes, just in a sentence or two on a postcard to one of the grandchildren. Sometimes I include a simple word about Jesus. I tell them what I'm praying about. I send them clippings. When I get stickers in the mail, I send the stickers to the little 4-year-old or the 2-year-old so that they can spend time sticking things on things. I cut out pictures to send them, and I do try to buy them books. And that, I think, is extremely important. What are your grandchildren filling their heads with? It takes time to pick out the good books for children. May I recommend a few? If your children don't have C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, get them. They are wonderful, and they're filled with spiritual lessons in very good story form. Some people would call them analogies or perhaps parables. They have lots and lots of very scriptural, spiritual meaning. Books that we were raised on were Beatrix Potter's books. Almost everybody knows Peter Rabbit, but not everybody knows Mr. Jeremy Fisher, Jemima Puddle Duck, Benjamin Bunny, Fierce Bad Rabbit, The Tailor of Gloucester. We had those books memorized so that if Mother didn't turn the page quickly enough, before we had learned to read, we could tell her what the sentence was on the next page because it was in our heads. She read to us A.A. Milne, especially the book Now We Are Six, which is poetry, and 6-year-old children love that kind of poetry. What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well, and she hasn't a pain. And it's lovely rice pudding for dinner again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? And so it goes on. There's a real lilting rhythm that children just love. Roundabout and roundabout and roundabout I go, all around the table in the nursery. Read those to your children. Read out loud when you have a chance. And if you don't have a chance to be with your grandchildren, send them the books. Beatrix Potter, A.A. Milne, C.S. Lewis, E.B. White, Charlotte's Web. A lovely little book that I came across more recently is called Sarah, Plain and Tall. I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the author, but you might be able to find it in your bookstore. Just a beautiful story. And there's another one that someone gave to our grandchildren recently, Babe the Gallant Pig. Another delightful story for children with some real morals in it. My grandchildren are enjoying their subscription to Cricket magazine. Things that grandmothers can do for their children. Set an example, pray for them, write to them, buy books for them.
Part 3 of our 4-part look at the subject, A Grandmother's Influence. That was ways to be a lasting example. Well, today we're just going to hear from one special guest. It's Dr. Tom Howard. At Elizabeth's memorial service at Gordon College, he spoke of laughter, books, media attention, composure, accents, extended comments from Dr. Tom Howard, brother of Elizabeth.
My sister Elizabeth, or as the family called her, Betty, was 8 years older than I, so that when she was a teenager, I was still a small boy. I point this out simply to emphasize an oddity, namely that she and I had an extraordinary relationship from the start. Somehow, even in the midst of the family hurly-burly, we were 6 children, which would arise amid the uproarious laughter that often marked the household. Somehow, no matter what was going on, Betty and I could always catch each other's eye in an exchange which said, "I know exactly what you are thinking and how you're feeling right now." This touches on something about Betty that her public perhaps never had the chance to see. The thousands of people who became aware of her when her husband, Jim Elliot, was killed in Ecuador, and then, as the years went by, those who were affected by her writings and speeches, these people might see her as a sort of heroic, almost Olympian figure. And that is not entirely a wrong impression. She was all of that, certainly. I think our parents were always a bit awed by her, even before she became well known. But she had an extraordinary capacity for laughter. She would laugh loudly and helplessly, for example, over our father's tales of the pratfalls that seemed to bedevil his footsteps, and at our oldest brother Phil, who was an irrepressible mimic, especially of Scottish or Norwegian or Philadelphia accents. She laughed at sheer wit, certain writers like Joyce Grenfell and Cornelia Otis Skinner. She laughed at radio comedians, and she laughed at the general drollery that marked our family life. I should add here that she herself was an irrepressible mimic, regaling us all with her imitations of remarks that she might hear at the grocer's or on the street or wherever people gathered. She especially liked regional accents, the local South Jersey twang or the Yankee argot that we heard every summer in Franconia, New Hampshire. Over the years, she came increasingly to look to me to tell her what to read. While she was still in Ecuador after Jim's death, I'd send her books by Kierkegaard or Paul Tillich, Dostoevsky, John Updike, Francois Sagan, and so forth. And as time went on, the works of Cardinal Newman and the Russian Orthodox theologians Alexander Shmeiman, and Callistos Ware. She also turned more and more to the works of the saints and medieval mystics. Of the spiritual writers from the evangelical wing of Protestantism, I would guess that Amy Carmichael would be very near the top of her list. Interestingly enough, she came gradually and I would say inexorably to find rest for her soul in the Eucharistic liturgy of the ancient church. I think that perhaps our Father's manifest love for what he called the great hymns of the church had instilled in her, as in me, an appreciation of the dignity, weight, and majesty of forms of worship that have been hallowed by long usage. In 1956, she became the focus of attention in the media. Life and Time magazines had articles about her and followed her entry with her small daughter Valerie into the Auca tribe in 1958. She was, in this connection, flown to New York and found herself swept into that world of news and publishing. She found that world vastly intriguing and, in some sense, sympathetic. The non-religious publishers and photographers found themselves bemused by this woman, straight from the jungle and the world of Christian missions, so manifestly civilized and at ease among them. Her aplomb pleased and I think startled them somewhat. She knew how to hold her fork.
That was one of the brothers of Elizabeth, Dr. Tom Howard, speaking at one of the two memorial services, this one at Gordon College for Elizabeth in 2015. Well, here's the conclusion of our series, A Grandmother's Influence, Being Available. As you think about being a grandparent to a non-relative, as you think about grandmothers being people who are there, think about a surrogate grandmother to Elizabeth herself.
Here's a heart-rending letter. Being a grandmother, I need all the help I can get, especially to a little boy, age 9, whose father was killed 4 years ago and whose mother is living with another man. I don't get to see the little boy as often as I'd like to, but when I do, I try to always tell him of Jesus. However, the home is split up, and it's difficult for all of us. Pray for that, dear grandmother. Another letter. I've always done volunteer work, and I still do, but it doesn't satisfy completely, even though I know God led me to the agency I work with. I know it's important to give my husband extra time now, which I have done by cutting down from the hours I spend away from home. I still feel restless, somewhat in limbo, wondering what I'm going to spend the next 30 years doing. I've prayed about this, but I don't seem to be able to connect with anything concrete. I enjoy the programs on child rearing, but would you do a series on midlife and the empty nest? Not the keep busy kind of program, but a deeper, spiritual, gut-level kind. Thank you. Well, I would hope that I've been talking about deeper, spiritual, gut-level kind of things. The deeper our walk with God, the more perfectly in our own humble daily lives we walk in company with Him, the more our influence is going to reach out to people that we can't even predict. And if this woman doesn't have grandchildren, then I would strongly suggest that she become a spiritual mother to some mother who does need her, some young woman who perhaps has little children. So she could then use her time becoming not just a mother, a spiritual mother to the mother, but a spiritual grandmother. And I have become sort of a surrogate grandmother to a family other than my daughter's family. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. But there is so much that we can do. And prayer is certainly a deep gut level kind of thing. Gut level, I guess, is not a very appropriate word when it comes to spiritual things. But I'm not just suggesting that you keep busy. I'm suggesting that you take onto your heart and participate intimately and deeply in the work of God in the lives of these people whom you can love. Another letter. I've been a homemaker with a bachelor's degree who has been full-time woman in the home for almost 28 years. Only part-time work through the years took me elsewhere. We raised 4 children. My husband died a year and a half ago, at which time, shortly after this, I started listening to you, Elizabeth. You know the Lord put you on the radio especially for me. I still have 2 children who are in college. Even though I'm a widow with no one at home full-time, I'm still here full-time. Since my husband's death and the last kids off to college, I've struggled with the stay-at-home role. Many friends immediately thought a job would be good for me and suggested this. I had always been very happy at home, thanking God through the years for the role and privilege, and I didn't suddenly have this desire to leave and do an 8 to 5. I find that being a full-time homemaker is still a noble role for me for many reasons. My home is always open to college kids. I have time for Bible study and prayer. I am available to help out in a special ministry to the unsaved, plus any number of ways that God wants to use me. I also have available time to visit and stay with my parents, who live an hour away, whenever I choose. I always told my husband that I never had to worry about the women's liberation movement. I had always been liberated. I was at home and always free to do what God wanted me to do. I believe that any woman can have a rich, full life at home, whether with or without children. I believe that a married woman has a place in the home and is fulfilling the role God has for her. I want to thank you for that letter, and I want to say that I believe just what you do. I do thank God for women who understand that it is a noble calling. If I say to you that your job is to love God, does that seem too vague? Well, some of the specifics of what it means to love God you can find in Amy Carmichael's 2 little books, which are real gems that I strongly recommend to every one of you. Amy Carmichael's books, If and His Thoughts Said. Somebody is out there, I'm sure, thinking, but I thought you were talking about grandmothers. Well, right now I'm suggesting that those of you who are grandmother age, but without grandchildren of your own, that you ask God to show you how to be a grandmother to other people's children. Do you remember hearing me talk about dear old Mrs. Kershaw? Well, I'm going to talk about her again. Mrs. Kershaw, as I look back, was sort of a surrogate grandmother to us. Somehow my mother found this old lady. She was a widow. She lived in a big old bare house all by herself, very sparsely furnished house. She was what you might call poor, and she was lonely. She was almost stone deaf, and my mother needed some help in the house in doing some of the lighter work, like making applesauce and washing dishes and doing a little bit of laundry in the machine. And so she asked Mrs. Kershaw if she would like to come and spend part of her days in our house. She was thrilled. She was the dearest old lady you'd ever want to meet in your life. She had been raised on a farm in New Jersey. She knew how to make everything from soap to soup. And she was God's gift to our family. Mrs. Kershaw would be picked up by one or the other of us in the morning. She always had a little sign on the door that would let us know that she was at home. She couldn't hear the doorbell, and so she left her door unlocked with this little sign that said, "I am home, please come in." And so we would open the door and walk in and have to wander through the house until we found her. And she was never startled by our appearance. She would just look up with her shining face, sweetest smile, and a funny voice. Since she had been deaf for so many years, she didn't know what her voice sounded like. And she would say, "Oh, here she is. Here's the daughter." She always called me the daughter. She called my sister by her name, but she called me the daughter. And I would pick her up, and she would come and get in the car. And if it was a miserable day, she'd say, "Oh, it's such a nice day today. It gives folks a chance to do what they want." She just was always happy. I don't know how many gallons of applesauce she made for us or how many thousands of brown sugar cookies she made. She would sit in the chair in my step-grandmother's room and talk to her. And, of course, both of them were deaf. So it was really something to overhear a conversation between those 2 deaf ladies. The remark of the one didn't necessarily have the slightest connection with the remark from another, so it was amusing at times. But Mrs. Kershaw would iron. She would spend her time doing whatever needed to be done. Would you call that spiritual work? Would you call that important in the kingdom of God? I have no question in my mind that it was of supreme importance. And I give you Amy Carmichael's word on this. If by doing some work which the undiscerning consider not spiritual work, I can best help others, and I inwardly rebel, thinking it is the spiritual for which I crave, when in truth it is the interesting and the exciting, then I know nothing of Calvary love. I'm going to read that again because we grandmothers need that. Let's not get too highfalutin about what we can do with our old age. We think we've got all this wisdom, we've got lots of experience, and there's no denying that. What does God want us to do with it? I want to read Amy Carmichael's words again. If by doing some work which the undiscerning consider not spiritual work, I can best help others, and I inwardly rebel, thinking it is the spiritual for which I crave, when in truth it is the interesting and exciting, then I know nothing of Calvary love. Grandmothers ought to be people who are there. I loved what that one lady said in her letter. I'm available. I have time to read my Bible. I have time to pray. I have time to be there when somebody needs me. And one of the sad things about modern life is that hardly anybody is at home. My husband and I one time picked up 3 high school girls who were hitchhiking, and it was during school hours. And so, of course, we were curious as to why they were out hitchhiking. Well, they said they'd gotten kicked out of school because of a false accusation. They got involved in some kind of a fight on the school ground, which they told us was not their fault. But they said, we were sent home, but we don't know where to go because nobody's home, and we don't have a key. 3 high school girls out on the highway hitchhiking. So we took them to the home of one of the girls who thought that maybe she'd be able to find a way into the house. Isn't it tragic? Where are the grandmothers, the prayers, the letter writers, the support group for the younger families? Will you be one of those?
Part 4 of A Grandmother's Influence. That was called Being Available. Well, thank you for being available to those around you, whether relatives or others in need of your influence. Thank you for taking time for them. And thank you for taking time to join us today as we found you maybe at home or as you took a drive. On behalf of the Elizabeth Elliot Foundation, in cooperation with the Bible Broadcasting Network, let me invite you to check out everything we have for you, whether it's a devotional, a lecture, maybe a video or other Gateway to Joy programs. Check it all out at elizabethelliot.org. elizabethelliot.org. Hey, have you ever taken time to leave a review for us, wherever you found this program today? If you get a chance, just a few lines that might encourage somebody else to check out our time together. Thank you. Well, until next time, may God remind you each and every day, you are loved with an everlasting love, and underneath are the everlasting arms.